Namaste. The title of this talk is The Meaning of the Hindu Temple. In a Hindu universe, nothing is without meaning. A Hindu does nothing without a proper goal. No ritual is meaningless. That's why the rituals are created to provide meaning to life, to provide a direction to life. Similarly, the Hindu temple, the most sacred and central institution, social institution to a Hindu, is obviously not without meaning. There is great symbolism to every part of the temple. There is great meaning to every module of the temple. In this talk, we'll briefly discuss that. Of course, the meaning is profound, the symbolism is great, and they cannot be captured within the confines of a few minutes, but let us take this as a primer to the meaning of the Hindu temple. So, the first image that comes up in your mind when you think about the Hindu temple is that it is a mini universe. When you go to the Lakshman temple, Khajuraho, the temple is huge, the proportions are huge, and it is actually built on a very great plinth, a very great Adhisthan. And on the walls of this Adhisthan, it is so great, it is higher than, it is around 8 feet or so, higher than the height of a normal human being. And you can see various sculpted panels. On these panels, every sort of scene is depicted. Most of the erotic scenes, the most famous erotic scenes of Khajuraho, are depicted on these walls of the temple. So, on the other hand, there are various sculpted panels which show war. So, on one hand, a great sexual activity is going on the other hand, a violent activity is going on. The sansar is on in its full show. There is violence, there is sex, there is love, there is leisure, someone is hunting, someone is eating, someone is playing, someone is making up. And there are all sorts of scenes that you can imagine that can be confined within those four walls. They are there. So, on the outermost walls of a temple, the sansar is shown in its full proportions. Everything which happens in sansar. As you start going inside the temple, these scenes will change and the number and frequency of the sculpture will also change. The frequency will decrease. As you go inside the temples, on the walls of the temple, there are a few erotic sculptures, but most of the central places, most of the Dev coasts are actually occupied by Devtas, by the deities themselves, and not by any erotic sculpture. They are only on the recesses of the temple, not on the projections, not on the great projections. As you go inside the temple, there are the erotic sculpture almost completely disappears. There are subsidiary deities, the Navagrahas, the various other Adi Devtas. And as you keep going inside, the sculpture, the kind of deities actually keep decreasing. When you go even more inside, only the family deities are around, the great family deities. And you go inside the Garbhagriha, you do not, the devotee actually does not go inside the Garbhagriha, but when you stand and see in the Garbhagriha, there is often only one Vigraha of one deity. In the Garbhagriha, the Devta is alone. There is no other scene. There is no other deity. There is no activity going on. It is all very, very calm there. The only bhav there is Shant. And we'll discuss the symbolism later of what happens when a devotee has darshan of the deity. But the series here is that as you go from outside to inside, actually the sansar disappears, and which is actually the symbolism which goes on in the personal individual quest, spiritual quest of everyone. That as we turn inward, as we turn our attention inward in meditation, in dhyan, the sansar actually starts disappearing. And when we are situated in samadhi, when we are actually very deep in meditation, the sansar disappears completely. At first we focus on the devta that we are praying on, the bij mantra that we are given, on which we are chanting. And at last, the distinction, even that distinction with that mantra, with that deity disappears. You become one with the deity, the devotee becomes the deity. Both the boundaries disappear, they both become one. The same thing is symbolized in the procession of a Hindu temple. that the sansar is present on all sides of the temple. As you go inside, it keeps in stages, it keeps disappearing. At first, the most violent and the most indulgent scenes disappear. Then the different deities, smaller deities disappear, and then even the smaller deities disappear, and until when you go in the Garbhagriha, nothing else remains except the Devata, except the deity. So this is a symbolism. This is actually putting this inward journey of an individual who is out on the quest of self-realization. It is actually giving it an architectural form. And I'm not aware of any other architectural tradition which has so beautifully translated something as abstract as the journey of self-realization of an individual and projected it onto the architectural idiom so beautifully. And the Hindu temple has done just that. This is not to be seen in just one temple. I am not talking of the Lakshman temple, Khajuraho. These sorts of sculpture and this sort of scheme can be seen anywhere, anywhere across all the different Dravid, Nagar, Vesar traditions and the different traditions, local traditions of these three major traditions. The second great symbolism of the temple is that the temple is seen as a sacred mountain, and it is seen as a sacred mountain from many angles, from different angles. So you can see in this shot the Kandri Mahadev temple at Khajuraho. You can see that at first when the devotee enters, there is a beautiful toran, beautiful gate, and there is a very small shikhar of the Mukh Mandap there. After the Mukh Mandap, there is the Ardh Mandap, then there is Mahamandap, and finally the Shikhar. And the height of these Shikhars of at first Mandapams and then the Shikhar, Great Shikhar, they keep increasing. So you can see a wonderful design here. It does not actually feel like climbing a mountain. It actually looks like a mountain. So from the Ardh Mandap, Mukh Mandap to the Shikhar of the Garbhagriha, it is actually great ascension. It looks like a mountain. It also feels like a mountain because the temple is imagined as a sacred mountain Meru. Mountain Meru has given a central place in Hindu mythology. It is considered the sacred mountain. It is considered a mythical mountain, which means it is the spiritual mountain of self-realization, which everyone climbs. And when one is considered to be at the top of it, it is considered that you have attained self-realization. So the top of the temple is actually right above the Garbhagriha, where the deity resides, where the primary deity resides. So that symbolism is exactly mirrored here of Mount Meru. And when you enter from the Mukh Mandap and when you go stand in front of the Garbhagriha and actually have darshan of the Devta, you are actually climbing that sacred mountain. So that's the symbolism which goes, the symbolism of the mountain that goes into the architecture of the temple. The other way in which you can see the symbolism of a mountain in the temple is when you look at the profile of the temple. You can see above the Janga, in particularly the Shekhri style of Naga tradition, which you can see in this shot, that there are various small shikhars. They are called Uru shrinks or half shikhars. The small shikhars are actually jumbling up in a cluster, and they are climbing up one over another like the very peaks of an actual mountain. And at the top is the Amlak and the Kalash above the temple, Kalash above the Amlak, which is directly above the Garbhagriha. So once again you have the image of a mountain, just like a real image of physical mountain, a mountain like Kailash, a mountain like any other sacred mountain in this sacred land of Bharatvarsh, but which is actually, as we discussed, actually a great way of conveying the mythical spiritual sense of Mount Meru. Climbing the Mount Meru means attaining self-realization, which happens when a devotee has an absolute darshan of the Devta, a complete darshan of the Devta, in which he forgets his own identity, in which he forgets what he actually is in this particular birth, in which he forgets all difference and becomes one with the Devta, loses his identity completely in the Devta who resides in the Garbhagriha. This is the architectural counterpart of climbing the Mount Meru, of making the journey of self-realization from outside to inside. The third symbolism of the temple is that it is imagined as a divine tree. Not actually just a tree, but a confluence of two trees. One tree which is rising from the ground, another which is a tree which is upside down, which is descending from above. Before we go into that, we have to understand one another symbol which goes in the building of the temple, which is at the center of the temple building tradition, but which is often not visible enough. Many do not know that beneath the main vigraha of the deity in the Garbhagriha, beneath the slab, the stone slab, underground, there is actually a kalash. Inside this kalash, there is a cot, a small cot, on which 9 grahas, navagrahas are actually kept, and the kalash is sealed. This kalash is called the womb, because the Garbhagriha is called Garbhagriha for a reason. It is the cosmic womb of this universe. The temple is imagined, as we discussed earlier, as a mini universe. And so that kalash and the garbh itself is considered as the sacred womb. The seed of this temple is considered to be inside that kalash. It is from there that the prana of the temple rises. It is there that the prana reside and expand onto and take the form of the temple. How? When a devotee has a darshan of the deity, it is believed that prana from that sacred beej inside the underground kalash, they rise, and the vigraha that is in front of you, it comes alive with the energy that rises from the seed inside that kalash. At the same time, here you can see the consciousness, the sacred consciousness arising from below. And there is another kalash at the top of the temple. We have been discussing temple in various forms now. Outside the temple, on the uppermost part of the shikhar, above the amlak, is another kalash. This is exactly in the line with the kalash that is underground. And inside this kalash, again there is that same cot, again that same beej, that same prana, which is in the kalash that is underground. So the kalash is mirrored. There is a kalash above, there is a kalash underground. There is a beej underground, and there is a beej, a seed, which is, you can say, the heavens, or in the other universe, in the other world. When darshan takes place, when the act of darshan takes place, it is believed that the consciousness from below arises, and there is a descent of consciousness from above, and they meet in between where the vigraha of the deity is. And this divine undertaking happens when a priest invokes the deity, when the priest invokes the supreme consciousness, and if the devotee at that same time, if the devotee is in front of the deity, then he partakes the divine, undergoing the divine descent and ascent of consciousness that is happening there. If at that perfect moment he is right there, then he becomes one with the deity. That divine ascent and descent of consciousness actually becomes his, and he forgets his own identity, as we discussed earlier, and he becomes one with the deity. He once again attains the goal of self-realization, albeit momentarily. This is a symbolic act of it. If you keep doing it, you will get situated into it permanently. But this is the symbolism of the temple, that it is actually the vigraha is the place where the ascent of and descent of consciousness takes place. And the act of darshan, that's why it is called darshan. The temple is a place to do a lot of things, as we'll discuss later. But primarily, it is also a place where you pray to the gods, pray to the deities. But it is also most primarily a place where darshan takes place. And darshan is not to see somebody else. When you go to a temple, you do not see differences. When you go to a temple, when you are in the Garbhagriha, remember that all differences, all separateness of the universe has started disappearing. And when you are actually in front of the Garbhagriha, all of this distinct quality of the universe, all of this separateness of different individuals, it has disappeared completely. There is only the deity. And if you forget yourself into the deity, into that divine descent and ascent of consciousness, then that goal is once again achieved. So this is the symbolism of temple as a sacred tree, that there is a beej, a cosmic seed underground, there is a cosmic seed above, and this descent and ascent of consciousness is also mirrored on the walls of the outside walls of the temple too. When you see the Jangha, you can actually see that in Shikhar, as if an upside down tree is there, and the roots are above and then the branches are going, and there is a tree which is going from the ground, and the branches of both the trees are actually meeting somewhere around the Jangha. And Jangha is where most of the sculpture is situated. Most of the Dev Coast and other attendant deities, attendant beings are there. So the two trees meet, and this divine metaphor of the temple as a sacred tree becomes complete even on the outside walls of a Hindu temple. Now the third and the last most important symbolism of the Hindu temple is it is also imagined as a sacred fire, as a Yajna Vedi, because there are various books, various scholars, various research papers, various studies which prove, and our scriptures are all actually more than complete in connecting the Hindu temple to the Yajna Vedi, to the Vedic sacrifice that used to happen. The connection is direct. When a Vedic Yajna was happening, and the priests and those who were taking part in the Vedic Yajna, they would invoke actually a deity, and in that sacred fire, they would invoke a deity, they would imagine a deity, and that's where the deity used to come. When in the later ages, our sages thought that not everyone could take part of a Vedic Yajna, because you had to, it was not a method of exclusion, it was a very technical job. Not everyone was qualified to chant those sacred mantras, to live that lifestyle perfectly, to be able to perform the yajna, because they would go on, not just on for hours, but for days and months and years on end sometimes. So a very you can say a strict lifestyle had to be followed. Not everyone was able to do it. Sanatan Dharma did not prefer forcing a lifestyle on anyone who did not want to be. But in order to take the knowledge of the Vedas, knowledge of or the benefit of Vedic Yajna to everyone and everywhere, our sages then actually imagined of a temple. In a temple, you can imagine that a Yajna Vedi is permanently situated. In earlier times, when a yajna would happen, the Yajna Vedi was there. When the yajna was completed successfully, it would be dismantled. In a temple, you can imagine that the Yajna Vedi actually exists permanently. The plan of the Garbhagriha is just like a Yajna Vedi. It is a square. At the center of it, which is called the Garbhisthana, where the sacred fire used to be, there is actually the Vigraha of the deity. So the symbolism here is actually complete. Just like the Vedic rishis, those who participated in the Vedas would perform a yajna and they would invoke a deity in a Hindu temple just to take the benefit to everyone, even those who could not live with the achar of someone who is supposed to perform these duties, even they could partake of this divine undertaking. How? Because there would be priests who would be living a life as is expected of someone who is performing a Vedic yajna or a duty as sacred as taking care of a temple. He would be living with all the charya that undergoes such a life, and all the agamas, which actually the agamas are the sacred texts which do not just instruct on how to build a temple, but also instruct on what should be the lifestyle of the priest, what should be the lifestyle of those who create the temple, the sculptors, the architects, the iconographers, and also the lifestyle of the devotees. Now the priest lives a very strict, a very disciplined lifestyle, because only one priest, only the chief priest can actually go, in most traditional temples, can actually go to the Garbhagriha, can actually touch the deity. And it's a very hard lifestyle, not everyone can do it, because he has to cook for himself, he has to wear only a certain kinds of clothes, he has to wash his own clothes, and even if he goes to the toilet once, he has to take bath all over again, because he has to perform worship, offer worship at the temple to the deity at least 3 to 5 times a day. So it's not something which is in the capacity of everyone. So the priest lives that lifestyle, and on the behalf of the devotee, he offers the worship of the devotee to the deity. So without actually living the lifestyle, this does not mean that anything goes, that you can behave anyway, but without actually living the very strict lifestyle that goes into someone who takes care of a temple, or someone who offers puja, or someone who undertakes a yajna. Actually, even those who are not able to do it, they are also able to partake the divine undertaking, the darshan that happens at the in a temple. That's why these temples were devised, and the iconography. Uh, uh, Many scholars have traced the iconography, Hindu iconography, directly from the Vedas, and which is very true. The iconography was not invented 1,500 years ago. It was there. The iconography was not invented 1,500 years ago. It was there even in the Vedas, and various scholars have actually traced the evolution of Hindu iconography to the Vedas. And that's why, in this sense, the Hindu temple was also imagined as a sacrificial fire. Thank you.